For nearly a century, the story of Amelia Earhart has haunted the pages of history books, puzzled investigators, and fascinated the public like few mysteries ever have. It was a case suspended in time, an unresolved chapter that seemed forever closed, sealed beneath the endless waves of the Pacific. But now, in a development as astonishing as it is unsettling, that chapter may finally be nearing its end. A breakthrough discovery in 2024 has rocked the foundation of what we thought we knew. The truth behind what happened to Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan is not the triumphant revelation many had hoped for. Instead, it's a grim, sobering account that may alter the legacy of one of history's most celebrated aviation pioneers. Amelia Mary Earhart was never just a pilot. She was a phenomenon, a symbol, a woman who defied gravity, both literally and figuratively, in a time when women were expected to stay grounded. Born in 1897 in Atchison, Kansas, she chased the horizon with a stubborn resolve, breaking speed records, altitude records, and gender barriers alike. By the early 1930s, she had already become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, earning her international acclaim. But her sights were set far beyond. Earhart wanted to become the first woman to fly around the globe, navigating its vast perimeter at the equator, an ambitious goal requiring not only supreme skill, but perfect timing, technical precision, and above all, luck. In 1937, Earhart embarked on that fateful journey in a Lockheed Electra 10E, a sleek, twin-engine aircraft that would ultimately become an icon of aviation lore. Her final attempt began in June, with the journey proceeding smoothly through South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. But it was the Pacific leg that would spell disaster. On July 2, 1937, she and Noonan departed Lae, New Guinea, on what would be the longest and most dangerous stretch, 2,500 miles of open ocean to a speck of land called Howland Island. The destination was critical not just as a refueling point, but as a lifeline. Missing it meant death. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed at Howland, tasked with guiding her and using radio signals. The plan was detailed yet fraying at the edges. Earhart's last known transmission, logged at 8:43 a.m., was chilling in its vagueness. "We are on the line 157337. We are running north and south." Then nothing. The silence that followed was not just eerie, it was eternal. What followed was the most extensive search and rescue mission in U.S. history at the time, covering 250,000 square miles of ocean. Ships crisscrossed the waters. Aircraft scanned from above. Nothing. Not a bolt, not a shred of metal, no wreckage, no bodies. It was as if the Electra and its occupants had been erased by the sea. The official explanation, fuel exhaustion followed by a crash and sink into the ocean, was accepted but never confirmed. The absence of evidence allowed the myth to breathe, mutate, and evolve into something far more enduring than fact. For decades, alternative theories sprang up. The Nikumaroro hypothesis suggested Earhart made an emergency landing on Gardner Island and lived for some time as a castaway. Artifacts like a piece of aluminum believed to match the Electra's skin, a woman's shoe from the 1930s, and even a glass jar matching a brand of freckle cream Earhart used were recovered from the island. But none of it could definitively close the case. Then came the conspiracy theories. Some said she was captured by the Japanese, interrogated, and executed. Others believed she survived, returned to the U.S., and assumed a new identity as a New Jersey housewife. These tales captivated tabloids, but credible proof remained elusive. One theory, however, avoided the fantastical. It focused instead on the possibility of a fatal navigational error, human, understandable, and tragically plausible. Known as the dateline theory, it posited that Fred Noonan, a skilled but fallible navigator, might have miscalculated their position after crossing the international dateline. Celestial navigation is precise, but dependent on accurate timekeeping and geographical awareness. A misstep in accounting for the dateline could shift their coordinates by up to 60 miles, enough to place the plane far west of its intended location, beyond the range of the Coast Guard's radio signals and outside the original search grid. The theory gained quiet traction in professional aviation circles, but lacked the resources for proof. That changed in 2024 when a bold and determined former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer named Tony Romeo entered the picture. Through his company, Deep Sea Vision, based in Charleston, South Carolina, Romeo had spent years preparing for a mission no one else was willing to risk. He had invested over $9 million of his own money, acquired state-of-the-art submersible sonar equipment, and built a team of experts, divers, and engineers. However, while other expeditions followed popular theories, Romeo followed the math. Guided by the dateline theory and equipped with advanced underwater scanning technology, his team embarked on a mission to the seafloor west of Howland Island, a place long overlooked. In January 2024, Deep Sea Vision made a stunning announcement. In the middle of a sonar survey at a depth of nearly 16,000 feet, they discovered an object unmistakably shaped like a twin-engine aircraft. The silhouette matched the dimensions and profile of the Lockheed Electra 10E exactly. Romeo, a cautious man not given to hyperbole, publicly released the sonar images. They were haunting, ghostly outlines of wings, a fuselage, and a distinctive twin-tail structure. The aviation world reacted with a mix of disbelief and awe. Could it really be her? The images ignited a global frenzy. Aviation historians, forensic experts, and marine archaeologists all weighed in. While sonar images are not the same as physical wreckage, the dimensions were too precise to ignore. The position matched the hypothesized crash zone predicted by the dateline error. Suddenly, a theory once treated as marginal had rocketed to the center of one of history's greatest mysteries. But the most disturbing aspect was yet to come. For decades, the idea of a crash was tragic but clean, instant, perhaps even painless. However, as Deep Sea Vision prepared for a second dive to obtain clearer images and possibly recover wreckage, new acoustic data suggested something unexpected. The shape of the wreckage was eerily intact. No major break in the fuselage, no scattering of parts. The wings remained attached. This indicated the plane may not have crashed hard into the sea, but instead glided down in a controlled water landing, a ditching. If true, this meant Earhart and Noonan could have survived the initial impact. The implications were chilling. Survivors at sea face a grim timeline: exposure, dehydration, sharks. If the plane remained afloat for hours, or even days, it's possible they waited for rescue that never came. Some theorize that they could have deployed a life raft or clung to the floating wreckage before it finally slipped below the surface. No one knows. But the theory that they may have died slowly, tragically, and helplessly while the world searched in the wrong place turns the story from one of heroic failure to a haunting tale of miscalculation and abandonment. This was no longer just a mystery. It was a revelation that struck at the heart of our collective myth about Amelia Earhart. The brave pilot didn't vanish in a blaze of glory. She may have perished watching the skies, waiting for help that never arrived, trapped in the vast, unfeeling crater of the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't just a tragic end. It was an unjust one. As the sonar image made its rounds across the internet and headlines proclaimed the possible end to the mystery of Amelia Earhart, a quiet unease settled in among experts. This wasn't a storybook ending. It wasn't the heroic blaze of glory the world had perhaps imagined. It was something much colder, much lonelier. The notion that Earhart and Noonan might have survived a crash landing, only to slowly perish in one of the most remote expanses of ocean on Earth, made the entire saga far more human and far more tragic. Every detail that followed only deepened the discomfort, peeling away layers of romanticism and replacing them with hard, pitiless possibilities. Marine archaeologists were quick to point out that the structural integrity of the wreck, based on the sonar's contour resolution, suggested an impact velocity far below what would be expected from a freefall crash. Instead, the shape and position of the wings and tail section pointed to a deliberate attempt to control the descent. This wasn't a plane that had plummeted, it had glided. Amelia, the skilled aviator that she was, may have realized at the last moment that Howland Island was out of reach and opted for a water landing. And she may have succeeded, at first. If that's true, then a disturbing timeline begins to form. One in which the plane gently touched the ocean surface and remained afloat for a short time. Long enough perhaps for Earhart and Noonan to emerge, assess the damage, and try to survive. This brings back haunting echoes of her final broadcast. "We're on the line 157337, running north and south." It wasn't the words that now stood out, but the tone. Urgent, yes, but not panicked, focused, rational, a woman in control, doing her best to solve a problem. The kind of pilot who doesn't crash unless she absolutely has to. But the Pacific Ocean is a vast, merciless place. If the Electra floated for even a few hours, or if a raft was deployed, they would have found themselves adrift in a featureless expanse with no land in sight, no way to navigate, and only the slim hope that someone, somewhere, would find them. And here's where the horror sets in. The search, directed toward Howland Island, was conducted under the assumption that the Electra went down nearby. Search patterns radiated outward from that point, but if the dateline theory was right, they were never there. They were 60 miles west, just outside the search radius, just beyond the horizon. They might have seen planes fly overhead, they might have fired flares or signaled with mirrors, and they might have realized far too late that nobody was coming. Further analysis of historic weather data for that region of the Pacific in July 1937 painted a bleak picture. The skies were partially overcast, visibility was sporadic, and the swells in the area were moderate to rough. A plane floating on such waters would be battered constantly. Even if the aircraft had remained buoyant, it would not have lasted long. Within hours or perhaps a day, it would have begun to take on water. The possibility that it sank gradually, perhaps even while they were still alive, adds a cruel dimension to the tragedy. Tony Romeo and the Deep Sea Vision team, now preparing a follow-up expedition, faced a sobering dilemma. What if they not only found the wreckage, but what remained of the crew? What if the interior of the aircraft, preserved in the icy depths of the abyss, still contained human remains? Would these remains be recoverable? Would they be identifiable? Would they even be publicly disclosed? These were no longer scientific questions. They were ethical ones. And the world watched, torn between curiosity and reverence, fear and fascination. Romeo made a public statement soon after the announcement. He emphasized that if human remains were discovered, they would be treated with the utmost respect and dignity, and any decisions regarding their handling would involve consultation with Earhart's surviving family and appropriate government agencies. But even as he offered reassurances, a darker conversation unfolded behind the scenes, one that questioned the cost of solving this mystery. Was it worth reopening a wound that had already scarred the American psyche? Was this closure or something closer to desecration? Still, the pressure to continue was immense. The public wanted answers. So did scientists. So did historians. The wreckage, if confirmed, would be more than just a historical artifact. It would be a time capsule, a snapshot of a single moment in 20th century history that has echoed across generations. Inside that aircraft could be maps, tools, personal belongings, clues not just to their final moments, but to how they lived and how they prepared. And maybe, just maybe, what went wrong. As preparations for a second expedition got underway in early 2025, the mood shifted from discovery to reckoning. Every possibility had to be considered. Could Earhart have documented her final hours in a notebook? Could there be film canisters, camera reels, or coded transmissions stored in the wreck that never made it to the world? If the Electra had glided rather than crashed, perhaps the cabin was not instantly flooded, preserving some of its contents. Romeo's team outfitted their submersibles with advanced manipulator arms, small-scale ROVs with onboard cameras, and suction recovery pods designed for fragile artifacts. There was another pressing issue: the legal status of the wreckage. Amelia Earhart's flight was a civilian one, but the aircraft in operation had the backing of the U.S. government. In international waters, wreckage ownership becomes murky. Is it the property of the United States, of Earhart's estate, of Deep Sea Vision as salvors in possession? Romeo wisely had already begun legal proceedings to ensure that any findings would be handed over to the proper authorities, but tensions were rising. There were rumors of other expeditions gearing up to race to the same coordinates. The Amelia Earhart mystery was no longer just a matter of history. It was now a high-stakes competition for discovery rights and legacy control. Meanwhile, new information surfaced from old archives. Researchers digging into overlooked files at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., found a forgotten memo from a radio operator stationed aboard the USS Ontario, another ship operating in the Pacific in 1937. The memo mentioned a weak, static-heavy signal heard on a rarely used emergency frequency around the same time as Earhart's disappearance. It was dismissed at the time. No triangulation was possible. But in light of the dateline theory, the signal's origin aligned disturbingly well with the newly discovered wreck site. This meant that for a brief window after the disappearance, someone may have been alive and trying to transmit. It could have been Earhart, or Noonan, or even an automated signal triggered by a malfunction. But what truly unsettled the analysts was that no follow-up was ever conducted. The lead was ignored, buried in bureaucracy, perhaps deemed irrelevant or simply misunderstood. If the signal had been taken seriously, if the search had shifted west even slightly, would it have made the difference? Could they have been saved? These were the questions that now kept historians and investigators up at night. The tragedy of Amelia Earhart had always been the mystery, but now the tragedy was the failure. The missed chances, the overlooked clues, the quiet signals in the noise. And what emerged from the growing body of evidence was not just a story of aviation's greatest loss, but a narrative of human error compounding human error until all that was left was silence. As public interest reignited with this potential resolution, Earhart's legacy took on a sharper edge. She remained a hero. Of that there was no doubt. But the romanticism that had colored her story for generations began to give way to something more realistic, more grounded. She was not a mythical figure who vanished into thin air. She was a flesh and blood person who did her best, fought the odds, and likely died watching those odds run out in real time. And what of Fred Noonan? Often forgotten in the myth of Amelia, he too was a skilled professional, a master navigator with a background in both maritime and aerial navigation. His inclusion in the flight was no afterthought. It was essential. And it's possible that it was his navigational decisions, flawed or not, that determined their fate. Historians began to re-examine Noonan's logs, maps, and instruments, looking for any sign of where the fatal misstep occurred. But just like Amelia, his fate had long since passed into shadows. As the spring of 2025 arrived, the second expedition to the ocean floor near the coordinates west of Howland Island was officially underway. Deep Sea Vision, now operating under heavy media scrutiny and with a fleet of legal advisors and scientific consultants, embarked on a mission not merely to confirm the wreckage, but to unlock the final pages of a story that had defied explanation for nearly 9 decades. There was tension in the air, hope, fear, and a profound sense of responsibility. Because if what they were about to find was truly the Lockheed Electra, then this wasn't just an investigation. It was a recovery of memory, of failure, of dignity. Their vessel, the DSV Osprey, was equipped with high-definition submersibles capable of diving over 16,000 feet. The pressure at such depths was crushing, but so was the historical weight of the task. When the first video feed came back, showing the familiar curvature of an engine nacelle and the rivet pattern unmistakably consistent with Lockheed's 1930s design, the confirmation felt eerie, not triumphant. No one on board cheered, no one high-fived. Instead, there was silence. The crew watched the ghostly silhouette of the aircraft lying in eternal darkness, its left wing twisted, but still largely intact, its landing gear oddly extended, as if the pilot had tried to soften the descent. Wreckage analysis soon revealed that the cabin had suffered only moderate structural damage. It hadn't shattered or imploded, as one would expect in a high-impact ocean crash. The fuselage showed signs of controlled entry, further validating the theory that Earhart managed a water landing. Marine silt had accumulated inside, but parts of the interior were remarkably preserved. That preservation extended to a haunting discovery: an aviator's logbook sealed inside a metal case, partially covered in marine life, but still legible once cleaned and dried. The contents were incomplete, water-damaged, and fragile, but enough remained to confirm its owner. In Amelia's unmistakable handwriting were pages chronicling portions of the journey. The last entry was dated July 2nd, 1937, the day of the disappearance. The entry was short, sparse, and it confirmed a navigation drift due to conflicting sunline readings. There were no emotional pleas, no panic, just methodical entries. Altitude, heading, wind speed, estimated fuel remaining. A single line at the bottom, however, cut deeper than any mystery ever had. Clouds ceiling thick. No sight of island. Will descend to try water landing. Noonan injured. The implications were heartbreaking. Fred Noonan had likely been injured during turbulence or mid-flight, perhaps affecting his ability to navigate accurately. That one detail rewrote decades of speculation. It wasn't just human error or miscalculation. It was a chain of compounding disasters. Navigational uncertainty, injured crew, deteriorating weather. And yet, even in the face of all that, Amelia had tried to land the plane. That effort, preserving both herself and her navigator, was the last act of a pilot who had inspired the world. And yet what followed was worse. Further scans around the wreckage revealed a short trail of debris, including a life raft tether and survival gear. The raft was missing. This meant they'd escaped the aircraft. They had survived the landing, but they hadn't survived the ocean. Search zones were reevaluated again and again. But if the plane had drifted even slightly during descent, and the raft had been carried by current or wind, then Amelia and Fred could have found themselves dozens of miles away within hours, with no fresh water, no food, and no visibility in the vast blue. Some forensic oceanographers proposed that the currents at that time would have pushed the raft northward, into a region of swirling gyres with no exit, a kind of aquatic trap where debris and wreckage are known to accumulate and stagnate. It's possible they died of dehydration within days. It's possible sharks found them. It's possible their bodies, lost to the elements, sank long before any ship even crossed their path. The lonely horror of that possibility chilled even the most hardened scientists aboard the Osprey. News of the confirmed wreck sent shockwaves around the world. Media outlets ran the story as the closing of an era. Documentaries were hastily greenlit. Memorials were planned. The U.S. government issued an official statement acknowledging the wreck as most likely the final resting place of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. The Smithsonian initiated a plan to digitally map the wreck site while refraining from any intrusive recovery, opting instead for preservation and respect. But not everyone saw this as closure. In classrooms, museums, and public forums, the discussion turned to what the mystery had always symbolized. For nearly a century, Amelia Earhart was not just a woman who vanished, she was the woman who vanished. An icon transformed by her disappearance into something beyond human. She was the subject of novels, children's books, ghost stories, conspiracy theories. And now with her fate exposed, her plane documented, and her final moments mapped out in salt and steel and sorrow, there was a quiet grief. Not just for her, but for what we had lost along the way. The myth was gone, and what was left was the truth. She died scared, drifting, with no one coming. There were voices who argued that maybe we should have left the mystery alone, that by solving it, we stripped her of something essential, that maybe it's better to live with the unanswered question than to look directly at the answer and feel nothing but dread. Because what if the mystery had been more comforting than the reality? But others pushed back. They said she deserved to be found, that she deserved more than a myth, that Amelia Earhart was never supposed to be a ghost. She was a pilot, a pioneer, a woman with plans and grit and brilliance. And leaving her in the dark forever, they said, would be the greater tragedy. Either way, her legacy changed. With the discovery, educational curriculums began shifting away from fantastical theories and toward grounded lessons on risk, exploration, and the limits of early aviation. Her story became one not just of ambition, but of resilience under pressure. Of a woman who, despite every failure in the chain around her, navigational errors, mechanical limitations, miscommunications, and bureaucratic oversight, did everything she could to survive. She stopped being a silhouette and started being a person again. In the final days of the Deep Sea Vision expedition, Just before the wreck site was sealed off for preservation, the submersibles made one final sweep of the seabed. They found a small metal plate, partially buried, barely distinguishable from the sand around it. When retrieved and cleaned, it turned out to be the aircraft's nameplate, engraved with the serial number 1055B, the factory ID of Amelia Earhart's Electra.